Just control the pen and everything machine, okay? Dear audience, good afternoon. I'm Sadia Shokat. I welcome to all of you in the first episode of the webinar for the month of April. This episode is about the women leadership importance, barriers, and opportunities. Dear audience, I hope you will respect the protocols of the webinar. Please use the chat box for your questions and the comments. This webinar is being recorded and presented through live stream that you can find through the sources of social media of University of Education. Dear audience, I'm delighted to introduce you with Professor Susan Madeson. Very warm welcome, Professor Susan.
Thank you.
Professor Susan is considered one of the top global scholars and thought leaders of the topic of women leadership. She has authored and edited 6 books and has published hundreds of articles, chapters, reports. Her research has been cited in US News, World Report, The Atlantic, The New York Times, Parenting Magazine, Chronicle of Higher Education, and the Washington Post. She is also a regular contributor to Probes and local state newspaper. Dr. Susan is the inaugural Karen Hay Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. And she has been doing a lot of work on the nonprofit organization and community boards. Her passion is to strengthen the impact of girls and women globally. Dear audience, I like a famous quotation of the Shell Clanback. She said, leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that the impact lasts in your absence. Women are powerful agents of change, and the far-reaching benefits of diversity and gender parity in leadership and decision-making are increasingly recognized in all spheres. Still, women continue to be immensely underrepresented in decision-making in workplace, business, and communities. It's time for the world to recognize the benefits of women in leadership and commit to placing even more women in position of power. Let's begin our talk. And over to you, Dr. Susan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been good to get to know you the last month or two, and appreciate the invitation to be with you this afternoon where you are, early morning where I am. So I do most of my speaking and work these days around women's leadership, or raising girls to become leaders. So that's what I enjoy talking about. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes. Yeah, that's perfect. Please go ahead.
Great. All right. So women in leadership, again, the topic is importance and barriers and opportunities. I wanted to spend a little bit of time with each of those. And I have done lots of research and work on women's leadership in my own U.S. state of Utah, but in the United States and in different parts of the world as well. And as was mentioned, I have written many books. I've actually run for my own state of Utah, the Utah Women in Leadership Project, have created some global groups, one with the International Leadership Association specifically for women, and many, many other things in terms of girls and women's leadership. And from time to time, I do have people say, well, why do you do all this work on girls and women? Do you not like men? I actually say I love men. I'm married to one. I actually have 4 children. 3 of them are sons. I have 1 grandson, so I really do love men. And a few times in the past years, people have said, well, to do all this girls and women stuff, maybe you were raised with a bunch of sisters. So I thought I would start today and just show you a picture of my siblings. So no, I'm just sisters. I actually have no sisters. So these are my six brothers. They're great men, and so sometimes people, wonder why I do the work I do. And I have to say that I'm not only interested, but I feel very called to do the work that I do. And I've done research on calling and women's leadership, and calling can be from a higher power, whether it's God or another higher power. But in addition, people that are really not religious or spiritual can still feel called, like they're made to do certain things. And the research specifically around women's leadership said when women feel really called or feel this purpose to move forward and do specific work, particularly around leadership, then they're more likely to lean in or step forward and use their voice when they feel that. So I do feel that, even though I was raised with six brothers, and I'm not going to talk about this today, but generally speaking, when we look at leadership identity, we spend time with women. I do in my workshops, really understanding their past and their home life and their schooling and different things. I've written much about that, but I thought I'd show you that picture to get started this morning. So I have a few different sections that I want to go through today. And the first one is, why does the topic of women's leadership even matter? I've had people say to me through the years, it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man or the combination. We just need good leaders. Now, I agree, yes, we need good leaders. But all the research through the decades does tell us it does matter if there are women and men working together or just a bunch of men working together in leadership roles. And throughout history, as we know, more men, in all around the world, more men are in leadership roles, and sometimes in political bodies or in leadership teams of companies or whatever, you have all men. It does matter. And let me give you some background on what we call the business case. So I'll go through this section fairly quickly. So I really started bringing together lots of research around this topic in 2015 when I published a local brief, but taking hundreds of studies, these 5 areas really popped out. And I have a slide for each of them. To improve financial performance, to strengthen organizational climate, to leverage talent, to increase corporate social responsibility and reputation, and to enhance innovation and collective intelligence. So what the research actually says, specifically this research comes from corporate research, so for-profit companies. So the research continues to say, and even in the last year, there's been many, multiple studies even emerge, that actually in those top leadership teams, on those corporate boards or C-suites or top leadership teams, when you have women on those, and 30% is really the tipping point. You can have some differences if you have one woman, but generally speaking, at 30% is where you really see some differences. So the research has said specifically on corporate boards and top C-suite or leadership teams that when you have men and women both working together, not just women, not just men, that the company experiences better financial results, increased profitability, higher operating results, better economic growth, faster debt reduction, strike better deals, make less risky bids, better stock growth, better corporate governance and oversight, and so forth. So that's just one of the key things. The second one is that the research, many different studies have said that actually you strengthen your organizational climate when there's women in those top roles in organizations. And we're talking about for-profit organizations, but also like universities and schools and colleges, also nonprofits or community organizations, and like legislative or political bodies, maybe in your towns or cities, the city council or mayor or whatever you may call them in Pakistan specifically. So in various kinds of organizations. So what the research has found that when you have men and women in those top roles working together, there are decreased turnover intentions, higher employee satisfaction, more women hired in that pipeline of moving up to leadership, and then the smaller pay gap, gender pay gap, increased employee engagement, increased productivity, higher customer satisfaction. Actually, the research around fraud is very interesting. So what we know is women generally from the research are more ethical and honest than men. Sorry, men, if you're listening, but I do know lots of great men who are honest as well. But one of the latest research studies said that if women do embezzle from companies or at least they take less money than men. Now that's not, we shouldn't brag about that, but I thought that was interesting. So reduced groupthink and higher team performance and more considerate team members. So the third area really is to leverage talent. So the research does say, and I love the second one on the left, that women tend to seek win-win solutions more. Now, we actually know this from the research around socialization, how boys and girls are raised. And for the most part, and I was raised with 6 brothers, as you saw, for the most part, boys are really socialized more competitively into win-loss. I know in the States, we have lots of sports, and I played sports growing up too. But boys are really taught and socialized more towards you can win, you can lose, you can be friends after. But girls are really socialized more towards let's have everybody win and lift everyone. And I would argue that the combination of those two can really be powerful, that we do need more win-win solution-oriented people, which women tend to be, in looking at solutions for the world, not just win-loss. So I think that's interesting. We as women ask different questions than men. In fact, not always, not every time, but the research supports that. That actually women often care because of our experiences, because of our socialization. We care about different things more strongly than men. And in the United States, when you look at state legislatures, so states in the US that have more women on them actually provide and give and allot more funding towards things like education, healthcare, more social programs like poverty and homelessness, and support and resources for things like sexual assault and domestic violence. So we do have, and men tend to provide money more for infrastructure and roads and supports and those kinds of things. So all are important. The key is if you're only really thinking about some things and not really representing, I can say that I represent men in my voice, but men have different socialization and backgrounds and so forth. So you really need men and women both. We bring different experiences as women to conversations. Women are more sensitive actually to nonverbal cues. And research has said about 93% of communication is nonverbal. So with our hands and our eyes and our facial and the way our bodies move and some of the sounds that we make, like those are different. And we tend to, because of our socialization and some genetics, just look at those things more than men. I do have men in my life that are really, not my husband necessarily, that really are good with that too. So it's not cut and dry. So different leadership styles, we tend to focus more on including others. We're very much socialized to that, more nurturing and developing other people. And men have very strong talents as well. But again, my my whole conversation is the research around both men and women working together. Um, and then the fourth, just quickly on this, and I don't know how often those of you listening, really work on increased corporate social responsibility. So that's CSR, is that especially in the for-profit, the corporate, that those top boards, if you do have women on those boards, and more women the better, you do care and give back to your community more. And really philanthropic areas give money, give time, and improve corporate reputation. So there's many studies that have been done in this area. And then finally, to enhance innovation and collective intelligence. This last one is the one that a lot of research continues to come out, even in the last year or two. That when you have, and this is not just the top leadership teams like corporate boards or top, country leaders in Congress or Parliament or whatever. It's that, but it also, much of this has been found at an individual or a company team level. So just putting together teams or groups all the way up the organization. So what the research has found, when you have gender diversity, that you actually have improved creativity and increased innovation, better decision making in the teams and organizations, higher collective intelligence overall. When you have different perspectives, that's important. And then, increased knowledge in formation and patents, and better team performance on highly complex tasks. So let me give you one example of this last one. So there was a research study released last year, and actually it's out of the UK. And I've done research in the UK for many years. And they have used the word in English, wicked problems. We don't use that in the States much, but I kind of like that word because what they mean is complex. So really complex, not simple problems, just really complex. And in today's world, when you look at what's happening, the pandemic, of course, is one of the most complex problems, and how to handle that in your families, in your communities, in your organizations. Those are really wicked problems, and that's what I have on this slide. So there was a research study just in the past year or so in the UK, in England, I believe it was, I believe it was in England specifically. And what these researchers did was worked with the military. And so significantly more men are in the military than women. And what they did was put teams of 5 together, and they had many teams of 5. And 2/3 of the teams were just all men. And then the other teams had 4 men and 1 woman. And then they gave them a wicked problem, or this really complex problem to solve. And in every case, other than they did find that there was 1 or 2 teams that they absolutely did not listen to the women. So they did not see the benefits. But in every other case, the teams that had even just 1 woman in the group of 5 outperformed, solved the issues significantly faster and better than the teams with all 5 members were men. And so this was a very striking study. So, and again, 30% generally is what is called the tipping point. So, if you really need to have 30% women, and other studies have said 3 is really the magic, at least 3 women to really help support each other. There just really are conscious and unconscious biases that impact how women can lead, and even the opportunities, and if they're shut down in meetings and so forth. So overall, in terms of this section, who benefits when you have both men and women working together? Not women taking over, not men continuing to have the power, but both actually individuals, teams, organizations, communities, governments, societies and the economy in general. So, secondly, I wanted to really consider some of the barriers. I have three main chunks today. So, considering some of the barriers, Jimmy Carter, who was many years ago a US president, said recently in his book, The Call to Action, A Call to Action, the biggest challenge facing our world today is based on the presumption that men and boys are superior to girls and women. And he put that out there. And what we think, there's parts of the world that really do say, things are shifting, things are moving. And yes, it is true. But in every country around the world and community, still are a lot of issues in that unconscious boys and men are really superior to girls and women is still every place in the world. So there are barriers and challenges. I use different words when we talk about these. Words like challenges and barriers and struggles and trials. I actually, in the research I've done through the years with really strong and high-level women leaders, I really have grown to appreciate the word challenges actually even more than those others. Because some of the top women leaders that I've integrated or interviewed and from my books and my research, when they talk about challenges, often they're talking about them in a different way than trials or barriers. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm getting these trials and barriers, but in terms of challenges, they sometimes even smiled, like, I wonder what I'm going to learn from this. Looking at, especially playing sports, like, it's going to be hard when you're in a team sports situation, but it's a challenge and you want to dive forward and really take on that challenge. So I really appreciate that. I also appreciate the conversation around internal versus external challenges. So things, because of socialization, that we might struggle with ourselves about confidence and what's called imposter syndrome and so forth, versus external, which is really what's coming at us in society, which these days, is continues to be much stronger than even the internal. But as a women's leadership professional, I work on both. Internal, help develop women, run programs with women, but also looking at the systemic issues in society and the structures and the processes and the practices that organizations have. Here are some, I love this model actually. It's in my last book, was 2017, the Handbook of Research on Gender and Leadership, have wonderful different chapters from people all over the world. And this was one of the chapters, and they have published, and they've actually have an instrument now, so published some great information on gender-based barriers, and really looked at, if you can see, I know it's kind of small, but there's an individual level, and this doesn't include all the barriers, but this has some that they really found in their samples. And then organizational, and then society, and you see how individuals within the organization, and then the organization is within the society. So in terms of the individual level, you can see right here the things that emerged in their research, the communication style constraints. So a lot of this is unconscious. It's through what, men can communicate, say different things. Women have to do it differently in terms of negotiation. If women negotiate salaries like men, they're usually shut down. And so women need to learn oftentimes to negotiate in different ways. We really have to change what might be natural so we don't hit what is social norms, and people say, why is she doing that? From men and other women. So unconsciousness, personalizing, psychological glass ceiling. There's both a glass ceiling in terms of organizations, but oftentimes women perceive that glass ceiling as well. And of course, the whole work-life conflict, the whole trying to balance, I don't love that word, work life. I integrate is more, when you may have children at home, or responsibilities with caregiving with your parents, or all of those things. Women, we know from the research, struggle with that and have more demands on their time from that than do men. So those are a few examples of the internal barriers, that women struggle with. There's more. But again, and so here's the next one. This was the biggest one, that organizational. Again, women bring those individual barriers. And these are just a few. I won't go through details of all of these. But devaluing communal practice. So what that means is, men are more agentic, what's called agentic, and women communal. So that's one of the reasons, and it's through socialization and how our society is. So women do more caregiving, and more are expected to cook and do those kinds of things. And women, it's not only socialization, but when you look at genetics, women tend to do that more relational instead of task oriented. And so that's why when you have so many fields of study and occupations that are more caregiving, or more like education, like healthcare, those kinds of things, often they're devalued in society because more women are there, and then women typically get less pay for that. So other organizations can include discrimination of many kinds, exclusion from informal networks. That actually happens a lot. It happens still in the United States, and my state, a lot, where there's more informal networks. And in corporate America, oftentimes, men will just kind of get together and go golfing. I don't know if you golf a lot in Pakistan, but that's very popular in the States. And most of the time, women are not invited, or they're invited, they run out to lunch or do things when women are. Those are informal networks, and they're powerful. We call them in the States the old boys network, and you see those kinds of things around the world. And informal is really important because things happen, the conversations happen, mentoring happens, sponsorship happens in informal situations. The glass cliff. And that actually means that oftentimes, in times of crisis specifically, women are asked to lead in different ways, but it's times of crisis. So that sometimes provides opportunities, but on the other hand, a lot of leaders fail during that time. So if you put women up all the time in those positions, and there's more of a chance of failure, that's what is called the glass cliff. And then lack of mentoring, lack of sponsorship as well. So if you're not familiar with the literature or the discussion around mentoring and sponsoring, those are really different. In fact, coaching is even different than mentoring and sponsoring. But a lot of times we think as women more of just mentoring, and those are important. Those are, when you coach a person, or help guide, or talk and really give some time. But sponsoring is different than that. And the research is that men do have more sponsors. Women can have mentors, but men have significantly more sponsors. And it's actually the sponsors that progress people up towards leadership roles. So sponsors would be things like finding funding for projects for you, or introducing you to maybe the head people. You have your own network as a leader, and you introduce her to some people in your network, or give her opportunities to meet maybe leaders in your community, or invite her to do certain things. Give recognition when you're speaking to a group about the work of a specific woman. Those kinds of things, getting that visibility is really important. Lack of support, male gatekeeping, male organizational culture. I call that the invisible masculine culture. Most cultures, in the United States and different parts of the world, really are were established by men, and they have this culture that really is more masculine than feminine. And it's more challenging for women to fit in those cultures. And you can see some others. I want to keep moving along because I wanted to leave some opportunity for some questions at the end. But the salary inequity, the pay gap that we see in nearly every part of the world still exists, even for equal pay, even for exactly the person has the same education and very successful, but there's still this perception from the processes and from the systems that men and from individual perceptions around that men really deserve or need more pay than women. Um, and I will say one more comment about the word tokenism. So that's important. Oftentimes, because there's so many more men in leadership teams and roles, that oftentimes they're like, let's put one woman, let's put her on so it looks like we're more diverse, where there's not necessarily a respect for what she says and what she knows and what she can do, but just put on there to have more representation and have it appear. And so that still is there. Unequal standards and workplace harassment. There is still a lot of sexual harassment and other kinds of gender-based workplace harassment as well. And then finally, in society. So again, if you look at this generally, I know you can't see all the words, but the individual here, the organization, and then societal. And things in society like the control of women's voices. Now, some people may think, what? But there are really, even media goes to men more, and women's voices are often, and things are changing somewhat, especially in my area. But still, you see this. Cultural constraints on women's own choices. So oftentimes people say, well, she doesn't negotiate or she doesn't choose to be in a different area when she majors in college. But it's not all women's choices. And so when you're socialized to think that women should do this, men should do this, then it really constrains when a girl grows up. It constrains even the choices. So she may not even understand that she has other choices, but because of society, those choices are limited. And then, of course, gender stereotypes are so, you just have strong gender stereotypes. And in parts of the world, some of those stereotypes are really consistent. Like men should do this, women should do this. Women should be the ones, the home raising, the children, those things. Yet I found in my research in different countries, even though many are similar, there really are unique things in different countries. I've done a lot of work in the Middle East, particularly in the Arab Gulf countries, and really seen how this plays out there. That's different than where I was raised. So those are really strong. And then gender unconsciousness, just not paying attention, not understanding really the differences in genetics and socialization between women and men, and just assuming. Even my own husband a few years ago, when he started really studying gender, said, I just did not understand this. I didn't know that there were so many differences, and I needed to really look more deeply about the differences and the similarities between men and women. And then leadership perceptions are definitely different in society. Boys are socialized much more often to see themselves as future leaders than girls are. So even those aspirations are different. Scrutiny is there. And then, so those are the main elements of this model, but I wanted to put a few other ones out there. Underneath all of these, there really are bias, and so much of our bias these days, some is external, like conscious, but so much is unconscious. So, and sometimes it's called implicit bias. I call it unconscious bias mostly. But if you glance down at this one right here, unconscious bias is those mental connections or associations without awareness, intention, or control. So unless we really get down and study these biases, it's hard for us because we're unconscious. So it takes work. I do more in-depth unconscious bias training, and it's changed the way that I look at things. We all have assumptions. We all make biases, and oftentimes people say, I don't make judgments or whatever, but I'm conscious. And when we look at someone for the very first time, and we're often not even aware, just it is so quick, a millisecond is what I call it, but just so quick. The research says that we judge on gender and then race and then age and so many things, and it happens so quickly. Other kinds of challenges include what's called ambivalent sexism, that includes two kinds of sexism, hostile and benevolent. So hostile sexism would be things like, inappropriate jokes, talking about women not needing equal pay, saying things like, oh, that's just for women, the women should take notes, or the women will take care of the food for the event, those kinds of things. And then there's sexual harassment and other things that are even stronger than that. So those are hostile sexism. We would hope some of those have gone away, but they're still there. But most people really don't understand benevolent sexism. So generally speaking, benevolent sexism comes from, and benevolent means kind and thoughtful and so forth. And men are often raised to be just kind and thoughtful in ways. But what we found in the research is this really does, when you do this and you're not conscious of it, it can undercut women's voices and so forth. There's a lot on this slide, and I'll give a copy of these slides to Sadia, who can give them if you're interested. I'm not going to go through this, but let me just give you one quick example of this. I'm looking and my time is moving along. So let me give you one example. This is often when men are super protective in certain ways of women, but then the women don't even get opportunities. In fact, some of the latest research on girls at 3 years old, and this mainly comes from their fathers being so protective, girls, this one study that came out last year said that girls will ask for help 3 times more than boys at the age of 3. And it's mainly because of fathers helping their daughters, like in a good way, right? Helping their daughters do things. But what happens is then their daughters are socialized to need more help. So that's a form of benevolent sexism. In the workplace, something like maybe a man, a leader, your department chair or a leader has an evening event where the president is going to be there, maybe leaders in the community. And he thinks, this woman that he works with, this would be a good opportunity for her to meet these top leaders. But then he may think, but I know she has 2 children at home, and I know it's the evening and she's worked all day and she's probably tired, and I don't want to ask her to do something else, so I'm not even going to ask her. So that comes from a place of like goodness in some ways, but then she doesn't get opportunities. He may say, well, I'll just invite this man because he's got a wife at home and it'll be easy for him to come. But what she's missing out on are networking opportunities to meet key leaders that may help her move her research forward or something. And so she doesn't even get the opportunity because she's not even asked. I hope that makes sense. So that seems like a good thing, but taking away opportunities, that's a form of benevolent sexism. And then, there's policies and practices like the organizational practices around recruiting and hiring and lack of opportunities like role models and so forth. That work and family responsibilities, lack of flexibility and family-friendly policies and organizations, and that good old boys club that we talked about, and even women's negative relationships with each other. As I mentioned before, there's often gendered language. And I know I'm using English, here, and most of you probably understand that, But there's differences in the workplace, and you'll have your own language, so you have to think about this. But the words, even success or ambition or career or choice, can be really gendered. That means men think about one thing and women think about another. In fact, research coming out of the UK that's talked about in my last book as well talks about ambition. And men actually are very ambitious, but women are as well. But ambition might look different between men and women. Men, it might be like the career ladder, like I'm going to go here, here, and then become the dean or become a vice president in your company or whatever it is. And women have ambition, but it might look like, yes, I want promotions in my workplace, but I also want, to do work in the community and be successful there. And if I'm not a successful mother, then it doesn't matter about all these other things. So women's view is broader. And in the US specifically, well, in English, the English language, the word girl is often used for grown women. And boy is not necessarily used for grown men. And so just that language, there's research around all of these. And often women are viewed as have that either or. So that means, well, I can't do both things at the same time. I need to just do one. So if she has, once she's a mother, let's say, then she can't be a leader. So either or, not and. So many different things like that. I'm looking at my time and it's moving along, so I'm going to skip this next slide. But internal barriers. So let me just give a couple of slides. So I've talked a lot about external systems and processes and practices, but this one came from the book Lean In, where it really does talk about the way that we're socialized and how we really struggle sometimes as women within ourselves to step forward and become leaders. Things like what we call perfectionistic. So being a perfectionist, trying to get everything perfectly right. Women typically struggle with that. Also, understanding our own strengths and gifts. Women struggle with that more than men. What's called imposter syndrome. That means, just always knowing you're competent and confident, but having that in the back of my mind, maybe I don't deserve this. Maybe, feeling like a fraud. Maybe somebody's going to figure out I really shouldn't be here or doing this. That doubt. And this one is representing rumination. Sometimes, this is related to sometimes, some of socialization, but genetics as well. Women tend to spin and think about things longer than men. If somebody offended me, I will think about that more than my husband. So, and they're just the perceptions of inequality. So sometimes there are things within ourselves that we struggle with to get the confidence, right? To get the confidence to lead. And one of the best things we can do, honestly, as women, is to have compassion for ourselves. Self-compassion is actually linked to confidence. And I don't have time today to talk specifically about all of that. I do workshops on confidence all the time. But I just wanted to put that out there. And again, in terms of the work life, just wanted to throw out some words: work-life balance, work-life integration. Women tend to integrate work and family and life more than men. Men tend to compartmentalize, which is, I'm going to go to work today, I'm going to do work, and then I'm going to come home and do family or do community or whatever. So there's different views of that and different struggles between men and women. So to conclude, wanted to just spend a little bit of time on uncovering those opportunities. A recent study that looked at the performance of 194 countries in their fight against COVID-19 found that women-led countries were generally more successful in fighting the pandemic than those led by men, and that's played out. However, it's worth noting that there was already a balanced representation of both sexes in the country. And so it wasn't just the leadership of a woman in the country, but how the leadership going down really worked. So the whole system was different. So there's some opportunities, and I've talked about that either or and zero sum. I haven't talked about the zero sum game as well, but that's just the view that if we don't have that, we actually do better and have opportunities. That's oftentimes that coming from men, that they think if I lift girls and women, then it takes from me. But there's research to suggest that men, you can support girls and women and be lifted as well. We can lift each other. It's not just either or. Like if I lift women, then it's going to take from men. And this is just another thing of of women specifically becoming leaders in unique ways and caring about things and really being more conservative in some ways that has benefited countries. Increasing the number of women in senior leadership positions is certainly a necessary condition for equity, but it is not a sufficient condition for shaping history. The fundamental challenge is not simply to select more women as senior leaders, rather it's to provide a form of leadership in the world that will foster global society survival and prosperity. I really appreciate that quote. That one's from one of the chapters in my book as well. One of the things, the opportunities that we have as well, is to really understand as men and women what really is leadership, formal and informal. And I'll tell you, anything that is, number one, a process. Leadership is not a person as much as a process. A process where you influence a group towards a goal. That's it. Those four. Process where you influence a group towards a goal. When we understand, that's an opportunity for us to figure out how to lead and move forward. Of course, we can lead in our political settings, in our community, at our colleges or universities, in our families, in schools, in society and law. You can just see in workplace and in the world in different ways. So we can lead so many different ways. And in terms of opportunities as well, just wanted to lay this out that in women's leadership development research, the research around how do you do the foundation of that, I think we have a lot of opportunities as we work with women around us to help strengthen our leadership identity. As I said at the beginning, to find their purpose and calling and really utilize that towards leadership. And then the third one that really is at that foundation is for all of us to look at our own biases, but also figure out unconscious bias to help us navigate better. So those are a few opportunities. We really do have many opportunities that can help, that can open the doors for women if we as women choose to do that. But people in society, including men, really figure out that it really does matter and it will benefit society. It will benefit everybody if we promote more women into leadership roles. And then a few thoughts as I conclude. One of the things that I believe is that the research tells us that women, because of socialization mainly, I call it a nudge or a tap on the shoulder, need to be, we don't know our strengths as much because we've been socialized to suppress those. But as we say to each other as women and men to women, you can do this. You have a good mind. You can apply for this professorship, or you can apply for this promotion. When people, and for women, often 3 different people doing that, encouraging her, then she really feels like she can. That can be powerful. In terms of, I don't know if you're familiar with Václav Havel in the Czech Republic. He was a leader that took the country out of led the Velvet Revolution there. He described the world as going through a transitional period when something is on the way out and something else is painfully being born. During such a transition, it is not surprising that people worldwide are attracted to women leaders' symbolic message of bringing positive change, hope, and the possibility of unity. The interplay of women and men's styles of leadership will define the contours and potential success of the 21st century society. I love Gandhi's quote, "Silence becomes cowardice when occasion demands speaking out and acting accordingly." We need more women to do this. The future, I love Eleanor Roosevelt's work, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And then when the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful. So I really have enjoyed, there's a few minutes for some questions, but I have really enjoyed presenting to you today. And I just want to conclude by mentioning that I really, as I look at the world today, as I look around, I really think that we don't have the luxury anymore to say only a few people are going to be leaders, or let's raise this boy or this person to be a leader. I think as you look around, there's so many opportunities and needs in our society for more leaders. And so I say we need to raise every girl and every boy and strengthen every man and every woman to use their voices, to have confidence, and to figure out where they want to impact in the world and move forward and become leaders. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susan. Dear audience, if you have any questions, please write it in the chat box, or you can directly talk with the Dr. Susan. Please. Any question?
I've taken most of the time. I know I was going to leave a little bit more time. I see the question, what do you think is the most significant barrier to female leadership? Now, in Pakistan, it might be different than where. I'm just acknowledging we have different cultures. But in my area now, I think with the work I've been doing, I've really understood that this sense of unconscious bias, that subtle stuff really, I didn't think it existed as much. I was raised with a bunch of brothers, and so I wasn't as much, looking at that. But I'll tell you, as I've researched, that we all have unconscious bias and so many biases. And to me, it's every place. It's with women, it's men, people of different races and ethnicities. And to me, that is really the biggest barrier. And unless we work with ourselves and understand and learn how to navigate and try to help others, continuous systems and processes and the way we do language, just in job descriptions, for instance. In job descriptions, I mean, there's masculine and feminine language, and I expect that's true with the language, various languages around the world. And in the United States, if there's masculine language, even small words like more task-oriented words, women will just not even apply for those jobs. I mean, subtle things, what we're finding in the research really matters. So those more unconscious or subtle things are what I see. But I'll tell you, in certain countries, there's still more hostile stuff. I mean, really blunt, like women can't do this, men need to do this. And if you're still doing the more hostile, if you're still dealing with so much hostile, then that's even more of a challenge or barrier than the subtle things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate that question.
Yeah. So by keeping in view the the lack of opportunities for the women leadership, so what type of the policies and reforms we need to be considered in terms of encouraging women leadership in all walks of life, especially when you consider the emerging country like Islamic country and developing countries like Asian countries? So what are your views?
That is a great question. I will tell you, changes in this area, in both in the United States, I'm sure if you're watching the news, you know about our riots this past summer and so forth. But gender and race are the two strongest things to change in society. And unless society is really, unless your organization, you can change it within departments or organizations. It takes work. It takes work and it takes conscious work. So there are often a list of things that companies, more diversity training or more training on this and that. That can help some. That can help some. And it's important to try everything, right? But unless leaders of organizations come together and make it a priority, it's going to be really hard. Women can try and move themselves into leadership positions, but if there are blocks, if there are barriers, then you can, it's like, hitting a wall, right? Where you really struggle. So helping leaders, I guess the first recommendation is helping leaders understand, and not just on the surface. Surface things can help some, but unless there are leaders in your organizations at your university, let's say, that really believe that we need to help train and open the eyes of our leaders around us. And sometimes that can come top down, and sometimes that can come ground up, and until you shake someone up and help them. But if you really, really care about serving your students, I will be very blunt here. If you truly, truly care about serving all your students the best you can do, you will, as a department or organization, really shake things up, even if it's uncomfortable to you. In fact, growth happens when you're out of your comfort zone. You will take this on and say, I want to create better environments so that everybody can thrive, not just parts of your student population or faculty or whatever, but everybody. So I don't have a very easy answer there. It's really more to.
Yeah, I can understand. Yeah. Thank you. We are just running short of time. Thank you, Dr. Susan, on behalf of University of Education. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and conducting a terrific session on women leadership and addressing the common challenges that generally women encounter while reading a prominent position. Thank you for sharing the valuable ways to overcome the leadership challenges faced by the women, and especially in the context of some emerging countries like Pakistan. And thanks again, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in the future in person. Thank you.
That would be wonderful. Hope to come to Pakistan one of these days as well. But the pandemic continues. So.
Yeah, it's
all right.
Yeah. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.